Welcome to Broad Strokes, Fortune show where we talk about the news that matters to women. So Anne, I think we should start this week by checking in on Donald Trump's cabinet. So on Wednesday, he appointed Linda McMahon to head the Small Business Administration. This is an interesting pick. You may know Linda McMahon as the co-founder of the WWE. She did also run for Senate, although she was not elected either time. Again, another unconventional pick from the president-elect.
She is definitely unconventional. It's great in some ways. You have to give Linda McMahon a lot of credit. She built that company from the ground up. It was small and now it's huge. And she is a woman, which is nice to see. But in Connecticut, when she was running for Senate, the content of WWE often came up and it was controversial because, you know, it's a very colorful organization. It's hard to describe just quite how raunchy and raucous some of the programming is, and it caught a lot of flack for being pretty misogynistic.
Yeah, maybe not totally off Donald Trump's brand. I will say his cabinet is shaping up to be mostly white, mostly male, as we expected. But he has appointed a few women. Nikki Haley, the governor of South Carolina, is his choice for the U.S. ambassador to the UN. He's tapped Elaine Chao for transportation. It's nice to see that there's a little bit of diversity sneaking in there. But I think what matters more is probably how the people that Trump is surrounding himself with are going to vote on women's issues, what positions they're going to take.
That's important because women aren't always in favor of women's issues. You have Elaine Chao, along with Jeff Sessions and Mike Pompeo, who voted against women's fair pay legislation. You have Jeff Sessions and Pompeo also being historically against legislation about violence against women. It is a little tricky. It's nice to see women, but it doesn't always mean as much as you might think it would. But on a brighter note, also this week, we should note that a bunch of CEOs came out in favor of achieving gender parity at the upper echelons of corporate America by 2030, which seems like a big step in the right direction.
I agree, but also I have to admit I'm always a little skeptical of these kind of pledges, probably because we've seen so many of them. Initially they were saying we're going to achieve parity by 2020, but now that we're getting close to 2020, suddenly it's 2030. There are some interesting things about this particular pledge though. So one, they're basically saying we are going to pay the people in our companies for what they do to the business, how they help the business, not for face time, and allowing more flexibility can really help women. The other really interesting thing is that they are really pushing for sponsorship. You know, whenever you talk to women who've actually made it to the top, they talk about sponsorship. They talk about the real power of having someone inside your company who's willing to fight for you. So I think putting more emphasis on that is a really good move. So we also saw this week that a group of 3 activist investors, it was Pax, Trillium, and Arjuna, came out and said, we're going to start pushing the financial industry to do 2 things. We want them to tell us what their pay gap is, and we want them to share the breakdown of their employees, diversity, and gender. These same investors targeted technology companies previously, and they had some success. They got both Apple and Intel, for instance, to reveal their pay gaps.
I think this is super interesting. I think it's a different approach than we've seen before, and I think they've had some success already. There was a trucking company that hadn't had many complaints about diversity issues. They said they didn't need to do anything, but the investors in the company actually voted overwhelmingly for the proposal. And I think this is interesting because you have investors kind of noticing this and seeing that it makes a difference for the business. It makes a difference for the bottom line if you're tapping an asset that might not be fully utilized.
While I always think more information is better than less information, this is not a magic bullet. Even if all of these firms decide to reveal all of this information every year, it's not going to just solve their diversity problems.
Right. We've known for a long time that the representation of women as CEOs of Fortune 500 companies is under 10%. It's been that way for years. It probably will be that way for years to come.
Agreed. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have this week on Broad Strokes. Come back next Friday for another episode on Fortune.com.